Imagine standing on a stage in front of a room full of strangers. You've got a microphone in your hand. Your palms are sweating. You open your mouth, you tell your first joke, and nobody laughs. Not a single person. Someone in the back yells at you to get off the stage. And then, and this actually happened, somebody picks up a piece of chicken and throws it at you while you're still standing there, holding the mic, trying to be funny. That's not a metaphor. That's not something I made up to make the story sound better. That actually happened to Kevin Hart. Now here's what makes that moment important. The guy who stood on that stage getting food thrown at him? That same guy, years later, would stand on a stage at an NFL football stadium in front of 53,000 people who paid money to hear him talk. That same guy would earn $90 million in a single year. Would build a media company valued at $650 million. Would sit across from Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes and say, with a straight face, "I'm no longer just a comedian. I'm an investment. I'm a studio." But none of that was supposed to happen. Not for someone who started where he started. So how did he do it? How did a man who started with nothing, no money, no connections, no degree, build a $650 million empire? What was the strategy? What were the moves? And more importantly, what can you learn from it and actually use in your own life? That's what this video's about. We're going to break down, step by step, how Kevin Hart went from earning nothing to earning millions, and then how he made the shift that most people never make. From earning money to owning things that make money. The deals, the equity plays, the ownership moves, all of it. Equity and ownership. The Kevin Hart strategy. But to understand how he built it, you have to understand where he came from. Because the strategy doesn't mean anything if you don't know what he was working with when he started. And what he was working with was almost nothing. Kevin Hart grew up in a single-parent household. His mother, Nancy Hart, worked as a systems analyst in the Office of Student Registration and Financial Services at the University of Pennsylvania. She held the family together. She was the anchor. His father, Henry Robert Witherspoon, was not. Henry was a cocaine addict who spent most of Kevin's childhood in and out of jail. He was absent for birthdays, absent for holidays, absent for the moments that shape a young boy into a man. Kevin and his older brother Robert were raised almost entirely by their mother. And while Nancy worked hard to provide stability, the truth is that growing up in that environment left scars. The kind that don't heal easily. But here's the thing about Kevin Hart. Even as a child, he found a way to cope. He didn't turn to anger. He didn't shut down. He turned to humor. Comedy became his therapy. Making people laugh became the only tool he had to deal with the chaos around him. He's talked about this openly, many times. His pain was real, and it was deep. But instead of letting that pain destroy him, he learned to transform it into something that connected him with other people. That instinct, to turn personal pain into something valuable, would eventually become the foundation of a multi-hundred-million-dollar brand. But we're not there yet, not even close. Kevin attended George Washington High School in Philadelphia and graduated in 1997. He briefly enrolled at the Community College of Philadelphia, but he didn't stay long. He didn't have a clear vision for his future. He didn't have a business plan. He didn't have a mentor. He was just a young man from a broken home trying to figure out what came next. After leaving school, he moved to New York City for a while, then later to Brockton, Massachusetts. During this period, he worked as a shoe salesman. Let that sit for a moment. The man who would one day command $20 million per movie and build A media company valued at $650 million was selling shoes for a living. And that's important to understand. Because the story of Kevin Hart's wealth is not a story of overnight success. It's not a story of someone who caught a lucky break and rode it. It's a story of someone who started from genuinely nothing and built his way up, brick by brick, failure after failure, year after year. If you're watching this right now and you feel like you're stuck, like you don't have the connections or the resources or the education to build something big, remember where Kevin Hart was at this exact point in his life. Selling shoes. No degree, no connections, no money, just a sense of humor and a willingness to try. It was back in Philadelphia, his hometown, that Kevin Hart made the decision that would change his life. He walked into a comedy club called the Laugh House and signed up for amateur night. He performed under the stage name Lil Kev. And by every account, including his own, it was terrible. He bombed. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't connect with him. They barely noticed him. But it got worse. Over the next several months, Kevin kept performing at small clubs and kept failing. He was booed off stage on multiple occasions. At one show, a heckler threw a piece of chicken at him while he was on stage trying to tell jokes. That's not a metaphor. Someone literally threw food at him. The problem wasn't that Kevin wasn't funny. The problem was that he wasn't being himself. He was trying to imitate other comedians, specifically Chris Tucker. He was copying someone else's delivery, someone else's timing, someone else's persona. And audiences could feel it. They could tell it wasn't authentic. This is where the first major turning point happens. And it's also the first real business lesson of this entire story. Kevin Hart's career went nowhere as long as he was imitating Chris Tucker. The moment he stopped copying and started telling his own stories about his childhood, his father's addiction, his insecurities, his real life, everything changed. In business, the same principle applies. You cannot build a lasting brand by copying someone else's formula. Your unique perspective, your specific experience, your honest voice. That's the thing no one else can compete with. It's your unfair advantage. At some point during these rough early years, Kevin crossed paths with a veteran comedian named Keith Robinson. Robinson was an established name in the comedy world. Someone who had already walked the road Kevin was trying to walk. Robinson saw something in Kevin, and he did what great mentors do. He didn't just encourage him, he challenged him. He pushed Kevin to stop imitating other comedians and start mining his own life for material. He told him that the comedy had to come from real experience, real pain, real vulnerability. Under Robinson's guidance, Kevin dropped the Lil Kev persona, started performing under his own name, and began building a comedy style centered entirely on his actual life. His father's drug addiction, his mother's tough love, his own insecurities about his height, his relationships, his failures. Kevin later said something that captures this perfectly. He said, "Because of what I do, it has to be an open book. But right now, this is a book that is being written." That shift, from performing as a character to performing as himself, was the single most important decision of his career. Not because it made him funny, he was already funny, but because it made him relatable. It made people feel connected to him. And in business, connection is the foundation of everything. Connection is what turns a customer into a fan into a community into an empire. Kevin Hart was talented, but talent without direction is just potential. Keith Robinson gave him something no amount of talent could provide on its own: perspective. He showed Kevin what wasn't working and gave him the framework to fix it. If you're building something, a career, a business, a brand, find someone who's already done it. not to copy them, but to learn from their mistakes so you don't have to make all of them yourself. Once Kevin found his voice, the trajectory started to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. He started winning amateur stand-up competitions across Massachusetts and the Northeast. Club owners started rebooking him. Word started spreading. His first real break in the entertainment industry came when director Judd Apatow cast him in a recurring role on the TV series Undeclared in 2001. It wasn't a lead role, it wasn't a massive paycheck, but it was the first time a serious Hollywood name looked at Kevin Hart and said, "There's something here." After that, small film roles started trickling in. Paper Soldiers in 2002, Scary Movie 3 in 2003, Soul Plane in 2004. None of these were blockbusters. None of them made Kevin Hart a household name. But here's where something interesting happened. Soul Plane, in particular, underperformed badly at the box office. It was considered a flop. But bootleg copies of the film spread all over the country, and people who watched those pirated copies loved Kevin's performance. They started showing up at his comedy shows. His stand-up audience grew because of a movie that technically failed. Kevin himself has talked about this moment. He told Oprah Winfrey that after Soul Plane, even though nobody went to see it in theaters, everybody had the bootleg. And suddenly his comedy club numbers started going up. People had something to associate him with. They saw his face in the movie, and then they came to see him perform live. Soul Plane was a box office failure. But it gave Kevin Hart something money couldn't buy at that stage of his career: visibility. People saw his work, and they wanted more. This is a critical lesson for anyone building a business or a personal brand. Early in your journey, sometimes the thing that fails commercially is actually the thing that builds your audience. Don't measure everything by immediate return. Measure by whether it's putting you in front of the right people. Now, here's a detail about Kevin Hart's early career that most people don't know. And honestly, it might be the most important business insight in this entire story. While Kevin was performing at comedy clubs across the country, he was doing something that almost no other comedian was doing at the time. After every single show, he collected email addresses from the audience. City by city, club by club, he built a fan database from scratch. Think about when this was happening. This was the mid-2000s. Social media hadn't exploded yet. There was no Instagram. Twitter was brand new. Most entertainers relied entirely on TV networks, movie studios, and talent agents to connect them with audiences. They were dependent on gatekeepers. Kevin Hart wasn't. He was building his own direct line to his fans. Every email address was a person who had already laughed at his jokes, who already liked him, who would open a message from him. When he had a new show coming to their city, he could tell them directly. No middleman, no algorithm, no network executive deciding whether to promote him. This is the foundation of everything that came later. Every tour that sold out, every social media following that exploded, every product he would one day launch. It all started with a comedian standing at the back of a comedy club with a clipboard, asking people for their email addresses. This is one of the most powerful business principles you can learn. Kevin Hart understood, early on, that relying on other people's platforms to reach your audience is a vulnerability. Networks can cancel your show, algorithms can hide your content, agents can drop you. But a list of people who want to hear from you, that's yours. Whether you're a comedian, a content creator, or a small business owner. Build your own distribution, email lists, direct contacts, community. Own the relationship with your audience, because that relationship is the real asset. In the early 2000s, Kevin's rising comedy profile caught the attention of ABC. They offered him his own sitcom. It was called The Big House. Kevin played a version of himself, a successful young man who has to move in with relatives in Philadelphia after getting caught up in an embezzlement scandal. It should have been his big break. Network television, prime time, a show built around him. But the show never connected with audiences. It was canceled after just 6 episodes. For a lot of people, that would have been devastating. A door opens, you walk through it, and it slams shut behind you. The natural response is to feel like you've been given your shot and you blew it. Kevin Hart didn't see it that way. He went right back to stand-up. Right back to the clubs. Right back to the grind. Because he understood something that most people don't. A setback is not the end of the story. It's a redirect. The Big House wasn't his destiny. Stand-up was. And the failure of that show pushed him back toward the thing that would ultimately make him one of the most successful entertainers on the planet. Kevin Hart's sitcom was canceled after 6 episodes. He didn't spiral. He didn't quit. He went back to what he knew and kept building. In business, you will have failures. Products will flop. Deals will fall through. The question is never whether you'll fail. The question is whether you'll treat that failure as a wall or as a door. Hart treated it as a door. By 2008, Kevin Hart had been grinding for nearly a decade. He had been booed. He had been broke. He had sold shoes, bombed on stage, had chicken thrown at him, had a sitcom canceled, and watched movies flop at the box office. But he had also built something that nobody could see yet. He had built an authentic voice, a direct relationship with his audience, a work ethic that refused to quit, and a deep understanding that his pain, his failures, and his real life were not liabilities. They were the raw material of his brand. In 2009, Kevin Hart launched his first headlining comedy tour, I'm a Grown Little Man. It was the beginning of a run that would shatter records, redefine what a stand-up comedian could earn, and set the stage for one of the most remarkable business transformations in entertainment history. But the real story, the equity story, the ownership story, the strategy that turned a comedian into a 9-figure empire, that's coming next. In 2009, Kevin Hart launched his first headlining comedy tour. He called it I'm a Grown Little Man. It wasn't an arena tour. It wasn't a global spectacle. But it was his name on the marquee, his material, his audience. A year later, he followed it up with Seriously Funny in 2010. That album sold well. The DVD moved over 4 million copies. His fan base was expanding. And not because of some studio marketing budget. It was expanding because of years of club work, email collecting, social media engagement, and that bootleg copy of Soul Plane that had spread his name to audiences he never could have reached on his own. Then came 2011, and everything changed. Kevin Hart's Laugh at My Pain tour hit 90 cities across the country and grossed over $15 million in ticket sales. To put that in context, that made it one of the most successful comedy tours of that entire year. His 2-night performance at the Nokia Theater at LA Live broke Eddie Murphy's long-standing record for the highest-grossing 2-day live comedy show by an African-American comedian. A record that had stood for decades. He didn't just perform that tour, he filmed it. He released it as a theatrical concert film. And that film, Laugh at My Pain, became a cultural event in its own right. It took his stand-up off the stage and put it on movie screens across the country, creating a second revenue stream from the exact same material. Think about that from a business perspective. He did the work once, wrote the jokes, rehearsed the set, performed the tour. Then he packaged it into a film and sold it again to a completely different audience. One body of work, multiple income streams, That's not just comedy, that's intellectual property strategy. 2 years later, in 2013, he released Let Me Explain, another concert film, and that one grossed $32.2 million at the box office. A stand-up comedy movie. $32 million. By this point, Kevin Hart wasn't just a comedian anymore. He was a touring machine, a content engine, and a brand that was growing faster than Hollywood could keep up with. While the tours were exploding, Kevin Hart's film career was accelerating alongside them. And this is where the real money started flowing. In 2012, he starred in Think Like a Man, which was based on Steve Harvey's best-selling book. The Farcaksat film was made on a $12 million budget and earned $96 million at the box office. Kevin wasn't the only star, but he was one of the main reasons people showed up. Then came Ride Along in 2014, opposite Ice Cube. The critics weren't kind to it, but audiences didn't care. The film made $154 million domestically. A year later, Get Hard with Will Ferrell and The Wedding Ringer continued the momentum. But 2016 was the year Kevin Hart became a financial category of his own. He starred in Central Intelligence alongside Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He voiced Snowball in The Secret Life of Pets, which became a massive animated hit. He continued his What Now tour, which had already made history the year before when he sold out Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia. 53,000 people in an NFL stadium, watching one man tell jokes on a stage in the middle of a football field. He was the first comedian ever to headline and sell out an NFL stadium. That show was filmed with 84 cameras and released as his third theatrical concert film, What Now?, which grossed another $23 million. Between August 2015 and August 2016, Kevin Hart earned approximately $90 million. That's from touring, film salaries, merchandise, and endorsements combined. To put that number in perspective, the second highest paid comedian in the world that year was Jerry Seinfeld, and he earned roughly $30 million less than Hart. In 2017, the Jumanji franchise entered the picture. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, alongside Dwayne Johnson, Jack Black, and Karen Gillan, earned $962 million at the global box office. The sequel, Jumanji, The Next Level, pulled in over $800 million. For that sequel, Kevin reportedly negotiated a deal that paid him approximately $30 million. Because he didn't just take a flat salary. He negotiated a share of the profits. That detail matters. It matters a lot. Because it reveals the shift in Kevin Hart's thinking. He wasn't just showing up and collecting a check anymore. He was negotiating for a piece of the upside. If the movie did well, he did well. If it did extraordinarily well, he did extraordinarily well. That's the difference between being an employee and being a partner. And that shift, from earning to owning, is the entire thesis of Kevin Hart's financial story. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Because everything we've talked about so far, the tours, the movies, the endorsements, that's all earned income. Kevin Hart worked, and he got paid. And he got paid very, very well. But earned income, no matter how large, has a ceiling. You can only be in so many movies a year. You can only tour so many cities. You can only film so many commercials. Your body gets tired. Your schedule fills up. And if you stop working, the money stops coming in. Kevin Hart understood this. And somewhere around 2017, you can see the strategy shift. He stopped thinking like a performer and started thinking like a business owner. Here comes the equity and ownership strategy. The first major move was Heartbeat Productions. This was his own production company, which meant he wasn't just acting in other people's projects, he was producing them. He was the one greenlighting ideas, hiring talent, controlling the creative direction, and most importantly, owning the content that came out of it. Night School, his 2018 comedy with Tiffany Haddish, was the first film produced under this banner. He wasn't just the star, he was the producer. That's a fundamentally different financial position. The second major move was even bigger. In 2017, Kevin Hart launched Laugh Out Loud, LOL, a digital comedy network and production company. He built it in partnership with Lionsgate, the studio behind franchises like The Hunger Games and John Wick. Lionsgate put up capital and infrastructure. Kevin put up his name, his creative vision, and his audience. The original concept was a subscription-based comedy streaming service. It launched with 7 original programs and featured comedians of all backgrounds. But the streaming landscape was getting brutal. Disney+, HBO Max, and other giants were pouring billions into the space. A niche comedy streaming platform couldn't compete on those terms. So Kevin and his team pivoted. They stopped trying to be a standalone streaming service and instead became a distributed, multi-platform content company. LOL started producing short-form content for YouTube, Snapchat, Roku, Pluto TV, Peacock, and Sirius Gets. Shows like Cold as Balls, where Kevin interviews athletes from an ice bath, racked up hundreds of millions of views. What the Fit, a fitness comedy series, hit over 435 million YouTube views. The Straight from the Heart podcast debuted on Pandora and became the #1 podcast on the platform in its first year. But here's the move that separates Kevin Hart from almost every other entertainer in Hollywood. In early 2019, Kevin Hart bought out most of Lionsgate's stake in Laugh Out Loud. He became the majority owner. He didn't just start the company, he took control of it. When he was asked about that decision, he said it plainly. Having the controlling interest, he said, "Let me build the company I believe in." That one sentence tells you everything about how Kevin Hart thinks about money. He doesn't want to be the highest paid person in someone else's company. He wants to own the company. He wants the equity. He wants the upside. He wants to be the one making decisions, not the one waiting for decisions to be made about him. And the timing was perfect. After buying out Lionsgate, he struck a deal with NBC Universal. Peacock took a minority equity stake in LOL, secured a first-look deal on Hart's content, and began distributing LOL's full catalog on the streaming platform. Kevin had just taken full control of his company and immediately brought in a major media conglomerate as a strategic partner, on his terms. In April 2022, Kevin Hart merged Heartbeat Productions and Laugh Out Loud into a single entity. He called it Heartbeat. And to fuel its growth, he brought in a $100 million investment from Abry Partners, a private equity firm that specializes in media and communications. The deal valued Heartbeat at a reported $650 million. And Abry Partners took a minority stake, meaning Kevin Hart retained majority control. He held an estimated 85% of the company. Let those numbers sit for a second. A comedian who was selling shoes in Massachusetts and getting booed off stages in Philadelphia now controlled a media company worth $650 million. And he owned most of it. Heartbeat organized itself into 3 divisions. Heartbeat Studios, led by Brian Smiley, handles film and television production. Heartbeat Media, led by Jeff Clanagan, manages the digital network, music, gaming, and distribution. And Pulse, the branded content division, works with blue-chip clients like Procter & Gamble, Chase, Sam's Club, Walmart, and DraftKings. The company had more than 70 projects in development and production. It debuted 23 projects across TV, film, digital, and audio in 2023 alone. It secured partnerships with Netflix, NBC Universal, SiriusXM, and the Sundance Institute. Revenue doubled year over year. The team doubled in size. And Heartbeat's CEO Ty Randolph told Yahoo Finance that they felt like they were just getting started. When Anderson Cooper interviewed Kevin Hart on 60 Minutes and asked him to describe what he is now, Hart didn't say comedian. He didn't say actor. He said, "I'm no longer just a comedian. I'm an investment. I'm a studio. I'm a partner looking for partnerships. Work for hire is not in my best interest if it's a one-and-done situation." That's the voice of a man who understands equity. The ownership story doesn't stop with Heartbeat. Kevin Hart went further. He launched Heartbeat Ventures, an early-stage venture capital firm focused on lifestyle, media, technology, and consumer packaged goods. He brought in Robert Roman as president and co-founder of the fund. At TechCrunch Disrupt in October 2022, Kevin made an announcement that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. JP Morgan had become the first institutional investor in Heartbeat Ventures through their Project Spark initiative, a program specifically designed to invest in diverse and women-led venture funds. But the moment that stuck with the audience had nothing to do with the deal itself. It was what Kevin said about his own journey into investing. He admitted, openly and without embarrassment, that he used to think investing was a scam. He said, "From my understanding, the world of investing, well, it was attached to the space of a con. I don't trust you. I'm not giving nobody my money so they can run off and do what they want." He talked about how the biggest learning curve for him was understanding that investments have a timeline, that putting money in today doesn't mean you get something tomorrow. That making your money work for you is a real concept, not just something rich people say. That honesty is powerful, because it's the truth for millions of people who didn't grow up around finance. People who associate investing with risk, with being taken advantage of, with a world that wasn't built for them. Kevin Hart was one of those people, and he learned his way out of it. Heartbeat Ventures has already invested in companies like Bright Fox, an electrolyte beverage brand, Ready Player Me, an avatar platform, Therabody, the massage therapy device company, SnackPass, a social food ordering platform, Roto, a car leasing platform, Path, a sustainable bottled water brand. The portfolio is diversified. It's intentional. And a portion of the fund is specifically allocated toward supporting minority and underrepresented founders. Because Kevin Hart knows what it's like to build something from nothing and to feel like the doors are closed. Between 2009 and 2022, Kevin Hart went from a touring comedian earning strong money to the chairman of a $650 million media company. He went from negotiating film salaries to negotiating private equity deals. He went from collecting email addresses at comedy clubs to receiving institutional investment from JP Morgan. And he did it by following a principle that most people in entertainment never learn. Stop trading your time for money and start building things you own. That's the Kevin Hart strategy. That's the equity play. And in the final part of this story, we're going to break down every lesson from his journey and show you exactly how to apply it. Whether you're building a business, growing a brand, or just trying to make your money work harder than you do. So let's take a step back. We've told you the story, the poverty, the grind, the tours, the movies, the companies, the $100 million deals. Now let's talk about what all of this actually means for you. Because this video isn't really about Kevin Hart. It's about what Kevin Hart figured out and how you can use the same thinking even if you never step foot on a stage or in front of a camera. Let's break it down. Simple, practical, no jargon, just the truth about how money really works, told through the story of a man who learned it the hard way. Kevin Hart didn't have a trust fund. He didn't have a college degree. He didn't have a rich uncle who could open doors. He had a mother who worked hard, a father who was in jail, and a part-time job selling shoes. And here's what most people get wrong about success stories like his. They look at the $450 million net worth and they think, well, he must have had something I don't have. But if you've been paying attention to this story, you know that's not true. What he had was a willingness to start before he was ready. He walked into the Laugh House with no training, no agent, no plan, and no talent. By his own admission. He was awful. He got booed. He got food thrown at him. But he started. And because he started, he gave himself the chance to get better. Most people never start. They wait for the right time, the right amount of money, the right opportunity, and they wait forever. Kevin Hart didn't wait. He just showed up and figured it out along the way. If there's one thing you take from this entire video, let it be this. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not closed by having more resources. It's closed by taking action with whatever you have right now. Even if what you have right now is almost nothing. Here's something Kevin Hart understood very early that most people never figure out. When he performed a stand-up tour, he didn't just perform it and move on. He filmed it. He released the film in theaters. He sold the DVD. He put clips on YouTube. He sold merchandise around it. One body of work, 4 or 5 revenue streams. Let me put this in simpler terms. Imagine you bake a cake. You could sell that one cake and make, say, $50. Or you could sell the cake, film yourself baking it, post the video online, write down the recipe and sell it as a cookbook, and teach a class on how to bake it. Same cake. Same effort to create it. But now, instead of 1 stream of income, you have 5. That's what Kevin Hart did with his comedy. The jokes didn't just live on stage for one night. He turned them into intellectual property, content that could be sold, distributed, and monetized over and over again in different formats. Laugh at My Pain grossed over $15 million as a tour and then made more money as a theatrical film. Let Me Explain grossed $32 million in theaters alone. What Now was filmed at an NFL stadium and released as another film. The lesson is straightforward. Whatever you create, whether it's a product, a service, a piece of content, a skill, ask yourself, how many ways can this one thing generate value? Don't just do the work once and walk away. Package it. Repurpose it. Distribute it across every channel you can reach. Remember the email list? Kevin Hart stood at the back of comedy clubs in the mid-2000s and collected email addresses from people who came to his shows. That sounds so simple, it's almost boring. But it was one of the smartest business moves he ever made. Here's why. When you have a direct connection to the people who care about your work, you don't need anyone's permission to succeed. You don't need a TV network to promote you. You don't need an algorithm to show your content to people. You don't need a booking agent to fill seats. You just send a message to people who already like you, and they show up. That's what Kevin Hart built. Long before he had millions of Instagram followers, he had a list of real people in real cities who had given him their contact information because they enjoyed his show. When he announced a tour date, he could fill the room himself. Now think about how this applies to you. If you're a freelancer, do your past clients know when you're available for new work? If you run a small business, do you have a way to reach your customers directly, not through ads, not through social media, but directly? If you're a content creator, are you building an email list or are you entirely dependent on platforms you don't control? The platforms can change their rules tomorrow. Instagram can throttle your reach. YouTube can demonetize your channel. TikTok can get banned. But a list of people who want to hear from you? That belongs to you. That's an asset. Kevin Hart figured that out when he was broke and unknown. You can figure it out now. This is the big one. This is the lesson that separates people who earn well from people who build wealth. For the first part of his career, Kevin Hart made money the way most people do. He worked and he got paid. He performed a show, he got a check. He acted in a movie, he got a salary. And those checks were enormous. $20 million per movie, $90 million. In a single year. By any normal standard, that's life-changing money. But Kevin Hart saw something that a lot of high earners miss. No matter how big those checks get, they stop coming the moment you stop working. If he stops touring, the touring income disappears. If he stops acting, the film income disappears. He was earning a fortune, but he was still trading his time for money. And there are only so many hours in a day and so many years in a career. So he made a shift. Instead of just being the person who shows up and performs, he became the person who owns the thing that creates the performances. When he founded Laugh Out Loud, he wasn't just creating content. He was building an asset, a company with its own value, its own revenue, its own growth trajectory. When he bought out Lionsgate's stake and became majority owner, he wasn't just making a corporate move. He was saying, I would rather own 85% of something that grows over time than collect a paycheck that ends when I stop showing up. And when that company merged into Heartbeat and was valued at $650 million, the math spoke for itself. Kevin Hart's 85% stake in that company alone was worth more than everything he'd ever been paid for movies and tours combined. That's the power of ownership. A salary pays you today, equity pays you today, tomorrow, and for as long as the thing you own keeps growing. Now, you don't need to build a $650 million company to apply this principle. It works at every scale. If you're a graphic designer, the difference between doing freelance work for clients and building a design template business is the same principle. One is trading time for money. The other is building an asset that earns while you sleep. If you're a chef, the difference between working in someone else's restaurant and opening your own is the same principle. If you're a content creator, the difference between doing brand deals and launching your own product is the same principle. The question you should always be asking is, am I building something I own? Or am I just working inside something someone else owns? Kevin Hart says something that a lot of successful people say, but he means it in a very specific way. He says, I am not the smartest man in the world, but what I am is an amazing team player. And the team that I've been able to put around me has helped me create this thing. He's not being modest, he's being accurate. Look at the structure of Heartbeat. Ty Randolph is the CEO. She runs the company day to day. Brian Smiley is president and chief content officer. Jeff Clanagan leads distribution. Robert Roman co-founded Heartbeat Ventures. These aren't just employees. These are partners who helped Kevin Hart build something far bigger than what he could have built alone. And this is a lesson that a lot of driven, ambitious people struggle with. When you're used to doing everything yourself, especially when you started from nothing, it's hard to let go. It's hard to trust other people with your vision. But the truth is, one person can build a career. It takes a team to build an empire. Kevin Hart didn't try to be the comedian and the CEO and the finance guy and the distribution expert and the brand strategist all at once. He found people who were exceptional at those things and gave them real responsibility, real authority, and real stakes in the outcome. If you're building something, ask yourself honestly, what are you great at? And what should someone else be handling? The answer to that question is the difference between staying small and scaling up. This might be the most important lesson of all. and it comes from Kevin Hart's own mouth. When he stood on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt and talked about getting into venture capital, he didn't pretend he always knew what he was doing. He told the truth. He said he used to think investing was a con. He said he didn't trust giving anyone his money. He said the biggest thing he had to learn was that investments have a timeline. That putting money in today doesn't mean you get money back tomorrow. That's real. And it's the reality for millions of people who didn't grow up around finance. People whose families never talked about stocks, or equity, or compounding, or venture capital. People who associate investing with getting scammed because, in their experience, that's the only context they've ever seen it in. Kevin Hart was one of those people. And he didn't let that stop him. He educated himself. He surrounded himself with people who understood the financial world. He asked questions. He made mistakes. And over time, he went from someone who was afraid to invest to someone whose venture capital fund is backed by J.P. Morgan. You don't need to become a finance expert overnight. But you do need to start learning. Read one book about investing. Watch one video about how compound interest works. Open one retirement account. Ask one question you've been afraid to ask. The gap between "I don't understand money" and "I'm starting to understand money" is smaller than you think. And closing that gap is the single most valuable thing you can do for your future. Kevin Hart closed that gap, and it helped turn a $450 million net worth into a platform for generational wealth. So what is the Kevin Hart strategy? What does equity and ownership really mean? It means this: start wherever you are, even if that's nowhere. Find your authentic voice, because that's the one thing nobody else can replicate. Build a direct relationship with the people who value what you do. Turn your work into assets that generate value long after you've finished doing the work. And when you have the opportunity, when you've earned enough, learned enough, and built enough, stop selling your time and start owning things. Own your content. Own your platform. Own your company. Own a piece of the businesses you believe in. Because a paycheck makes you comfortable, but ownership makes you free. Kevin Hart didn't grow up with any of this. He wasn't taught equity strategy in school. He didn't inherit a portfolio. He learned it by doing it, by failing, by asking questions, and by refusing to stop. He went from a kid in North Philadelphia who used jokes to survive a broken home to a man who controls a media empire valued at $650 million. And when Anderson Cooper asked him on 60 Minutes whether he's on track to become a billionaire, Hart didn't brag. He said, "Hopefully. And even if I don't, I think the better side of what I've done is create what can become the new norm for other people in the business of entertainment. Not just being a part of the business, but learning and understanding how to become the business." That's the strategy. Don't just be part of the business. Become the business. Equity and ownership. The Kevin Hart strategy.